Well, last on our list is basically what I want to look at is the factors that predispose people to become or remain obese. And we predisposed to obesity and basically remaining so. And fat actually is an ideal form of stored energy. What you find is fat in and of itself is not bad. Now we've taken to describe body types that way, but essentially fat is a high calorie itself, let me just put this down, is a high calorie fuel reserve that carries the body through periods when food is scarce. So it's a high calorie fuel, and essentially our bodies, in response to scarcity or anticipated scarcity, will begin to stockpile. Well, let me write this down, for times of scarcity. Now, you look at that and say, you got to be kidding me. It's not like we have scarcity. But the other component that contributes to fat stockpiling is also stress. In fact, in most situations, the hormone cortisol contributes to a higher level of fat. Stockpiling. That's the word of the day, it seems like here, and those are part of the key. And I think generally what happens is that people get some misconceptions around the whole idea. There's obviously good fat and bad fat. There's fat that is high calorie. There's other fats. Lipids is the key term that we oftentimes use. That is really empty of any caloric usefulness. The thing to keep in mind is that in most developing societies today, obesity actually signals affluence and social status. However, the tendency to eat energy-rich fat or sugar becomes dysfunctional in a world of easily accessible food. And so we have moved into a dysfunctional pattern because we keep eating these high-fat foods, even though we don't have the exercise to burn it up, and dysfunctional patterns of eating actually begin to basically emerge. So it's dysfunctional. The tendency to eat energy-rich fat or sugar is dysfunctional, particularly when we're in a society where food is easily accessible. Now we add that, like I already mentioned, a lack of exercise and increased levels of stress. And you have a toxic combination that oftentimes leads to obesity. There are clearly psychological needs underlying a lot of eating that people engage in. The abundance of high-calorie food has led to higher rates of obesity in our country today, which raises the risk of other forms of illness and shortens life expectancy. So you have joint dysfunction that comes from joint problems. Obviously, you also have problems that arise in other organ functioning because they're overstressed because of the amount of weight that the person is carrying around with them. A good example of this would be hypertension. forms of diabetes. You have heart difficulties because the heart is working so, heart problems, and a whole host of other issues that begin to arise as a result of that. And I already mentioned life expectancy. So obesity affects both how you're treated, but also how you feel about yourself. Obese people, especially women, experience weight discrimination in job hiring and placement and promotion. They experience bias in searching for a romantic relationship. And so obesity has these huge kind of rippling rings of impact that go farther and farther out in terms of relationships and in terms of self-view, if you will, and self-esteem that comes into play. Genes influence. We've already made mention of the fact that genes do influence body weight and body type. But they don't determine it. So genes influence, but don't determine. Generally, you find people in families having a very similar body type, but again, it is not a determination that they will. It's just a fact of the matter is what they have basically inherited. So people differ in resting metabolic rates. Essentially, once someone gains fat tissue, less energy is needed to maintain that tissue than is needed to maintain other tissue. So needless to say, muscles and the development of lean muscle mass burn calories far more effectively and tend to perpetuate that than burn calories faster than fat does. Than fat does. And fat again is part of the backdrop to our bodies. If we lose too much fat, as I've mentioned before, a lot of times women who go on severe diets and end up developing an anorexic disorder or anorexia, before long what we've connected is that when fat drops, their body fat drops below a certain level, their menstrual cycle ceases. Unquestionably, environmental factors such as sleep loss, social influence, often high-calorie foods, sedentary lifestyles also have a huge impact. And the environmental factors and how I manage those are also quite key in managing my body weight. Those who wish to diet should begin only if they feel motivated and disciplined to do so. They would have to deal with these elements here. So minimizing what was I saying? Exposure to food cues. Food cues. They sometimes, more often than not, people who lose weight do so in the context of supportive relationships, but they have to eat healthy food. Another key point here is something that is oftentimes referred to as mini meals. Instead of eating 3 squares a day, what we have begun to realize is that having 6 small meals throughout the day manages the highs and lows of the blood glucose level, keeping it at a upper rate that is the most healthy. Generally, that evens out the metabolic rate throughout the day, and the person doesn't have extremes in hunger or in being full, And when that happens, generally they maximize that basal body or basal metabolic rate to their advantage in terms of how they what their body burns in terms of calories at its most basic rate. All right, well, that covers some of the basic concepts of motivation, and we're going to look at the next concept or the next modules, which really has to do with sexual motivations and how they impact our need to belong.